People assume whenever I talk about the arrest, prosecution, detention, incarceration of children, I must be talking about serious violent offenses. But the reality is the vast majority of children who are in juvenile courts today are there for behaviors that every single one of us did when we were kids, or that our own kids are doing right now. Certainly that all white kids across the world, not even just, domestically in the United States, but internationally. I am Kristin Henning. I hail from the South. I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, but spent much of my young years in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. But now I live in Tacoma Park, Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C., and I work right here in the heart of Washington, D.C. So truly, I am a child of the South, so I grew up with parents who are preachers and teachers, or a family full of preachers and teachers. My father was a businessman. My mom was in early childhood education. She was a teacher, professor who taught folks early childhood education. And so I grew up with a family who always were serving young people in the church, in the community, children who had less opportunities maybe than we did growing up. And so I think it was a real important foundation for who I ultimately became. Also, growing up in a family of preachers and teachers, they were also activists. And so very much engaged in the importance of making sure that all of us as children understood the importance of social justice and being active on the front lines in social justice. I always, again, had this passion for kids and justice. And so I think somewhere in my head, I thought that the way to actualize this commitment to social justice with young people was through the law. And I honestly can't tell you, I don't have a family full of lawyers. We were teachers and preachers. I just didn't have, lawyers that I was looking at. But it was just in my heart to be an advocate, to fight for people. And somehow I was introduced to the law as a vehicle through which to achieve those goals. I think my most profound memories, especially as they relate to the work that I do today, occurred in college, for example. I remember distinctly having an opportunity to do an internship at the local courthouse in Durham, North Carolina, where I was an undergrad. And I will never forget the day that I first showed up for that internship. And I was assigned to work with the district attorney's office, the prosecutor's office. And so I walked into the courthouse, and I saw a line of children chained together at their arms and at their legs, being escorted down the hallway. And I just remember stopping dead in my tracks, thinking, what in the world? I didn't know that we shackled anybody, more or less children, in contemporary America. And of course, those kids were disproportionately Black and brown. So I made my way into the actual courtroom, and I sat down with the prosecutor. And I said to her, where I really want to be is over there. And I was pointing across the room to the defense attorney who was sitting with the kids. And that, for me, was an absolute defining moment. Well, after I knew that I wanted to be a defense attorney, you quickly can do the research. What does it take? Where does one go? And so, truth be told, so let me back up in response to your previous question. I mean, maybe it was that. It was that moment that I knew I wanted to be a defense lawyer. I also knew I wanted to be a lawyer. But something sent me to that courthouse in the first place, right, to do that internship. So how did I get to the other side? How did I actually become a defense attorney? When I was a first year in law school, I will remember sitting in orientation for all the first year students. And one of my professors, Jean Coe-Peters was her name, began to talk about children and representing children and her vantage point in abuse and neglect kinds of cases. And I began to think that I could represent kids in delinquency cases. And I approached her after that orientation workshop, and I asked her, tell me more about what you do. And she became a mentor all 3 years of law school. My second year of law school, I did indeed enroll in her course. And I took clinical courses designed to represent children in special education cases and children in abuse and neglect cases. But I realized that those are the same kids who ultimately ended up, not all, but ultimately ended up in delinquency cases. And so I said to her and other professors at the law school, how can we begin to represent kids in delinquency cases? And they said, let's do it. And just having wonderful mentors, we figured it out. We went to the local courthouse where we were already practicing, talked to the defense attorneys and said, how can we join you in this work? So that's how that's truly how I became a defense attorney. And that was by then it was probably my third year in law school by the time we actualized it. And then after that, it was pretty clear that I began applying for fellowship opportunities that would allow me to learn the craft, the art of being a lawyer, a zealous advocate, and specifically for young indigent children. And then from there, I moved on. So my very first job after law school was a 2-year teaching fellowship and defender fellowship. It was a combined defender fellowship right here at Georgetown Law School where I am now. And for those 2 years, I split between supervising students, law students, who were representing clients, just like I did when I was in law school, but also I had my own caseload under the supervision of more senior faculty. And so that was my first 2 years out of law school. After those 2 years, I then went to the DC Public Defender Service, which is just an extraordinary office, really high-level attorneys, really comprehensive training program, support network, holistic advocacy. They have social workers and investigators and folks who do class action. So after I completed the 2-year fellowship, I went to the DC Public Defender Service, which is just an extraordinary office, which believes in zealous, holistic advocacy on behalf of adults and children. And I specialized in the youth division of the Public Defender Service. I was the lead attorney for the juvenile division because I was really committed and passionate about working with young people. And we had social workers and we had investigators and we had experts in helping us identify appropriate services for young people. But really, it was about making sure young people had due process and were not being prosecuted for being children. Right? We found in that practice that so many young people were there for things that young white kids would never be in court for. I've been working for 26 years, and I got to say, in that entire 26 years, I have only represented 4 white children, which is just insanity. And truly, everyone's mouth should fall open at that statistic. And I'm not alone. Like if you ask anyone who's practiced in, the nation's capital juvenile court, everyone will tell you, you just don't see white kids in our court system. And that all the kids in the system, by and large, are African American. On occasion, you'll see, a Latino youth, but it's pretty rare. It's African American children. And it's just so disturbing. And you can't continue to do the work as long as I have and not really, want to blow up the whole system. But short of that, right, you want to ask the hard questions. Why do these extreme disparities happen? Are these extreme disparities having any impact on, do they improve public safety in any way, right? In other words, if we lock up all the black kids, will we be safer? And clearly the answer is no, just absolutely not. See, with all the mass shootings have not been by, African-American children by any, way, shape, form, or fashion. I also wanted to know what impact these racial disparities were having on the health of black children, emotionally, developmentally, psychologically, educationally, in terms of their opportunities and their prospects in life. If these racial disparities, the ways in which we criminalize black children, isn't improving our safety in any way, then what do we do about it? How do we reverse that trend?